I knew something was off the day Brennan called my work quaint during stand up, and then spent the rest of the meeting bragging about Kubernetes like it was his idea of foreplay. My name's Sarah, and for the last 4 years, I've been the duct tape holding Gridware together. I wrote the failover script that saved us during the Q3 blackout. I'm the reason our backend still talks to the payment processor without curling up and dying every 2 hours. And yet, I've spent most of my mornings nodding through Slack messages from 20-something cloud visionaries who think uptime is a suggestion and version control is optional. Nobody asks how the API functions across legacy endpoints. Nobody wants to ask, because I'm not shiny. I don't present well. I don't have a Medium post about how I rewrote the monolith in Rust for my dog walking startup. I just fix things, quietly, which means I'm invisible until something breaks. But I'm not stupid. I've known since year 2 that Gridware was never going to promote me, never going to give me equity that mattered. They'd rather bring in another polo-shirted messiah to accelerate vision, while I stayed in the basement scraping performance gains off 2012 architecture like a raccoon in a data center. So yeah, I started building something else. Nights. Weekends, on my own gear in my own name under an LLC I set up before Gridware even existed. It started as an exercise in technical stubbornness. What would infrastructure look like if I wasn't forced to compromise every step? The answer turned into something terrifyingly elegant, a self-healing infrastructure API that actually did what Brennan's buzzwords promised. No more patchwork queues duct taped together with vendor SDKs. No more begging for DevOps bandwidth or pretending our cron job wasn't a single-threaded nightmare. Just low overhead, resilient, modular back-end architecture, running circles around Gridware's core. Funny thing is, I never meant for anyone to notice. I kept it unlisted on GitHub, tied to a private repo through my LLC. I wasn't recruiting. I wasn't pitching. I just wanted to build something that didn't insult my intelligence. But of course, Brennan found it. And like a raccoon with a Rolex, he couldn't resist trying to claim it. Before we go any further, if you're watching this and you've ever been the invisible one, the person they depend on but never promote, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of you listen without subscribing, and honestly, it means the world to the team behind these stories when you support us. All right, back to hell. Brennan stumbled on the API about a month after his first Synergy Summit, when his AWS sandbox lit up with latency spikes he couldn't explain. Instead of fixing it, he decided to look for shortcuts. Found my repo, skimmed the readme, and suddenly he's pitching it to leadership like it was his idea. He swaggered into all hands like Tony Stark in a startup hoodie, calling it Gridware Core, our future, our platform, our ticket to hyperscale. I just sat there, watching, not blinking, because I knew something he didn't. I hadn't written a single line of that code on company time, not on company hardware, not under their IP agreement. And when legal sent me a revised contract, just to formalize a few things, I smiled, printed it out, and swapped page 3 with an older version Brennan had never read, one that excluded any and all pre-existing LLCs, signed it with a pen from my first dev job, handed it back without a word. They thought they'd found a gold mine. I was just waiting for them to dig too deep. Brennan arrived with the kind of energy you only get from a TED Talk addiction and 0 real scars. First day, he paraded through the office in a shirt so tight it looked like it had been painted on, clutching a MacBook like it was a holy relic. "We're gonna streamline the back end," he announced, grinning like he'd just invented JSON. "Refactor for scale. Unify the dev lifecycle around velocity and culture-first engineering." I watched 3 senior devs pretend not to vomit. See, Brennan wasn't hired to fix anything. He was hired to look like he was fixing something. Gridware was chasing a $145 million acquisition from a firm that didn't know an endpoint from an elbow, and Brennan had the right buzzwords on LinkedIn to make it seem like we had our act together. Internally, we were duct tape, spaghetti code, and prayer. Externally, thanks to Brennan, we were a cloud-agnostic, event-driven architecture platform with seamless enterprise integrations. He said that sentence out loud once, unironically, in front of people. Meanwhile, actual systems started cracking. The payment sync froze every other Friday. Logs bloated into oblivion. Jenkins collapsed under the weight of its own misery. Brennan's solution? More dashboards, more metrics, more dashboards for the metrics. All while quietly asking me, "Hey, can you just Stabilize this for demo mode? So I did. Not with Gridware's crumbling stack, but with my side project, wrapped cleanly in proxy calls, spun up from my own infra, like a miracle bandage for someone who refused to stop stabbing themselves. He never asked how I got it to work, just showed it off like it was his new toy. Then, one Monday, I walked into the office and found my GitHub repo pulled up on the main conference screen. My personal repo, LLC tied, clearly labeled. The README still had a footer that said, created by Sarah Monroe, Monroe Systems LLC. But Brennan? He just clapped his hands together and said, this, folks, is what happens when we unlock our team's hidden potential. He didn't look at me when he said it, just kept talking. The API structure is brilliant. We're going to productionize this as Gridware Core, standardize the stack, integrate across client nodes, and yes, we will be claiming full ownership moving forward. That was the moment the air changed. I felt it in my ribs. Later that afternoon, he swung by my desk, wearing that smug little startup grin like he'd just eaten my lunch and wanted to thank me for the seasoning. Hey, he said, lowering his voice. I know it's technically outside repo, but just a heads up. Anything you build while employed here is, kind of ours. Standard clause. Legal will loop you in with a quick IP alignment doc. Should be painless. I didn't answer. I just blinked at him like he'd told me gravity was optional. Because here's the thing about people like Brennan. They assume silence means surrender, that the quiet ones are too soft to draw lines, that engineers don't lawyer up, that backend is just plumbing, not leverage. But I had filed my LLC 3 years ago. I had time-stamped logs. I had Git history going back to before Gridware hired me. I had receipts. And Brennan? Brennan had just tripped over the live wire with a smile on his face. Brennan called it a technical formality, said it with that patronizing tilt in his voice, like he was doing me a favor by legally stealing my work. We were in a cramped glass meeting room that still smelled like dry erase fumes and startup panic. He leaned back in his ergonomic throne, one leg crossed over the other, and dropped a folder on the table like it was a goddamn invitation to the Met Gala. Legal just needs this on file, he said. Standard IP clarification. So we can move forward without any ambiguity. I opened the folder. The front page was boilerplate nonsense, headers in all caps, section numbers like landmines, and enough vague language to choke a patent troll. But then I saw the meat of it, a clause they'd slipped in under the radar. Anything developed during my employment, regardless of time, location, or equipment, belonged to Gridware. It even mentioned retroactive assignment of rights. Retroactive. Like they could reach back in time and slap a Gridware sticker on my childhood finger paintings. I flipped through the rest, calm as ever, nodded. Got it. I'll review this and get it back to you by end of day. Brennan grinned like I was some obedient little code monkey finally getting in line. Perfect. Appreciate you being a team player, Sarah. What he didn't see, what none of them ever saw, was the fire building in my gut like a storm with a grudge. Because this wasn't just theft. This was Brennan trying to bury me under the very system I kept running. And he thought I'd thank him for the shoveling. I went home that night, pulled out the exact copy of the original IP agreement from my onboarding packet, the one Brennan never bothered to update after HR reshuffled. It had a lovely little carve-out in Section 7B that exempted pre-existing entities from Gridware's claim. And since Monroe Systems LLC was incorporated 3 years before I joined, it was as clean as a whistle. Then I went to work. I printed 2 versions, their updated IP claim and the original I had archived. I carefully replaced the updated clause pages with the old ones. Punched the stack neatly, signed at the bottom with the same pen I'd used to endorse my first consulting check under Monroe Systems, slid it into the folder, brought it in next morning. Here you go, I said, handing it back to Brennan. He didn't even open it. Just tossed it to legal and went back to whiteboarding an architecture diagram so riddled with buzzwords it could have doubled as a startup word search. Now, technically, I had signed their document, but the pages he never read, the ones that mattered, protected me, explicitly, legally, strategically, and every line of my side project code remained the exclusive property of Monroe Systems LLC. Brennan, of course, didn't notice a damn thing. He was too busy parading my infrastructure as the backbone of Gridware's future. He called it Sarah's pivot layer during the next leadership call. Like naming it after me would make me forget I hadn't handed it over. He didn't know I had alerts built into the system, deep ones. If any external server tried to recompile or clone the API without verified credentials, it would auto-revoke access and ping me with a kill switch warning. And it sat there, silent, watching, waiting. I drank my coffee. I did my job. I smiled when Brennan asked if I could productionize the deployment pipeline. Sure, Brennan, let me just hook up the explosives you think you're driving. Calm surface, glassy stillness, but underneath, I was already cutting the rope. Investor Day came dressed in fake confidence and rented suits. Brennan shaved for once, slicked his hair back like a used car salesman trying to pass for a product visionary, and fired up a deck so bloated with gradients and buzzwords it might have required its own GPU to render. He opened with a slide that read, in all caps, Gridware Core. Our infrastructure reimagined, and there it was, my work. Live demoed on screen, dressed up in branding I never approved, front and center like it had always belonged to them. This, Brennan declared, is our new backbone, low latency, high availability, fault tolerant, built in-house by our amazing team. And yes, we own every line. He didn't say my name, not once, just smiled and waited for applause. I watched from the back of the room, arms folded, stomach still. People clapped. The board nodded like they'd just been shown fire for the first time. The real engineers in the room shot me glances, half guilt, half fear. They knew. They just didn't want to know. Then came the acquisition buzz. 2 weeks later, word leaked that the buyers were circling. Big ones. East Coast private equity firm, fond of technical buyouts and brutal efficiency. They didn't care about logos or slogans. They wanted the code, the stack, the bones. So they sent their due diligence team, a swarm of legal analysts and senior engineers who didn't blink when Brennan tried to distract them with slide decks. They weren't there for flash. They were there to read everything. And that's when Brennan started sweating. They asked for the full license tree for Gridware Core. He handed over the repo, stripped, forked from my public GitHub, sanitized just enough to look internal. But code doesn't lie. Within hours, the due diligence team requested deeper origin logs, metadata, creation dates, and most importantly, the license file. Brennan deflected, talking in loops. It's proprietary now, our internal fork. We've formalized ownership. It's signed. Legal's got it. They nodded. Quiet. Too quiet. One of them, a woman with a dry tone and a notepad full of highlighted clause references, asked to see the original license file from the early repo commits. So Brennan went fishing through the audit logs. Eventually, he found what he thought was harmless, a short text file tucked into the root directory. Unassuming. Clean. Except for one line, center-aligned, not bolded, not loud, just there. License valid only if code remains under exclusive control of Monroe Systems, LLC. Transfer of ownership or forced assignment invalidates all usage rights. I had written it 18 months ago. Quiet, precise, and absolutely enforceable. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. But to corporate legal, it was a time bomb. Brennan didn't get it. Not yet. He kept saying, "We own the code," like a man standing in a burning house and arguing with the fire inspector about square footage. Every time someone from legal or engineering raised a question, he buried them in jargon. Look, the code's operational. The system works. We integrated it. That makes it ours. Right? They didn't argue. They just kept asking questions. Calm. Surgical. Because what Brennan didn't understand was that in tech, real tech, it doesn't matter how shiny your pitch is. It matters who built the foundation, who signed it, and who owns it. And while he spun his little performance, the trap was already creaking open beneath his feet. I sat at my desk, watching commit pings come in from their audit bots. They were crawling the infrastructure now, comparing file histories, mapping license headers, tracing dependency chains all the way back to me. And somewhere in a conference room upstairs, Brennan was probably still smiling. Still bragging, still repeating the lie, "We own the code." They asked for documentation on Tuesday. Not suggestions, not a pitch, Not another over-designed PDF deck filled with Brennan's buzzword salad and infographics designed to confuse rather than clarify. No, this was a formal, precise, no room for bullshit request from the buyer's legal team. A single-line email sent to our general counsel at 6:02 a.m. EST. Please provide full provenance, license chain, and IP documentation for all production-facing infrastructure code, including Gridware Core, effective from date of first internal usage. Brennan saw it and smirked like it was homework someone else would finish. Just send them the package, he told legal. The one we prepped last week. It's clean. It wasn't. I knew that, because I'd seen it. 4 pages of half-truths and assumption-stacked timelines that ignored every single piece of verifiable creation data. They listed Gridware Core's first commit as 6 months ago, pretended it was born from internal tooling, omitted any reference to Monroe Systems LLC. They were hoping no one would ask questions. But the buyer's counsel did what Brennan never could. They read. They read the commit hashes. They read the metadata buried in the Git tree. They read the time-stamped licensing file that Brennan had overlooked, the one preserved through every fork, because he was too arrogant to scrub history before pushing the code live. They found my clause, not the one Brennan waved around in his fake documentation, the real one. The clause in the original license file, dated, signed, and still active, license is irrevocable unless ownership of code is forcibly assigned, or controlling interest of Monroe Systems LLC is transferred or absorbed by another entity. In such case, license becomes immediately void and all rights terminate with no provision for retroactive transfer. It was surgically worded. No flair, no wiggle room, just a trap with the pin already pulled. You'd think Brennan might have noticed the wording if he hadn't been so busy playing executive cosplay. You'd think legal would have cross-checked the repo logs. But no one in the building had the nerve to tell Brennan he didn't understand what he was talking about. So they filed the internal claim anyway. A week before the meeting, moved the API code into Gridware's production umbrella, changed ownership flags in the repo, and sent an email to counsel declaring that Gridware now held exclusive control of the infrastructure. That email was the bullet. Because as soon as that happened, the kill switch clause was triggered. My system registered the violation the moment their server fingerprint changed. I got a ping on my phone at 2:13 a.m., one quiet line of text. Monroe Systems. Licensing status. Invalidated. Ownership conflict detected. API access revoked. They'd pulled the trigger without realizing they were pointing the gun at themselves. 17 minutes later, the API shut down. Not entirely. Just enough. Latency crept. Jobs paused. Queues began to build. Brennan thought it was a hiccup, another scaling issue. He told the team to restart the pods, roll the cache, call the usual playbook. But the buyers saw something else. Because when they ran another due diligence query against our systems the next day, they got this. License invalid. Violated clause. Section 9, transfer of ownership. That's when everything stopped. They called for a clarification meeting. Brennan, still in his ivory tower of delusion, told them it was just an ops artifact. An artifact. He said that, out loud, with a straight face, and when they asked him again for the actual licensing trail, he doubled down, said, "It's ours. We use it. It's internal. End of story." He had no idea that I was the story, that every line of that infrastructure was built like a weapon with fingerprint recognition, and his didn't match. I didn't say anything. I just watched the timer run out. Brennan walked into the war room like he was announcing the second coming of Kubernetes. It was 2 days before the acquisition meeting. The office was tense, over-caffeinated, full of people pretending to work while secretly running what-if simulations in their heads. But Brennan? He looked like a man who'd already popped champagne in his mind. "We're good," he said to the CEO. "Everything's locked down, infrastructure's stabilized, legal's on file, Gridware Core is fully absorbed." He said that word, absorbed, like he thought it made him sound strategic. What it actually meant. He'd gone behind everyone's backs and filed an internal IP transfer form through legal, listing Monroe Systems LLC as a defunct partner entity. Defunct. like I was some forgotten shell company with no teeth. He marked the API code as fully internalized, assigned it to a Gridware business unit, and moved it under their software escrow umbrella. It was all smoke. Legal didn't even verify the ownership, just filed it quietly, probably thinking it was cleanup before the big show. Brennan timed it perfectly. Late Friday afternoon, when nobody wanted to read a clause, just rubber stamp and go home. Except one system did read it. Mine. At 6:07 p.m., my monitoring daemon detected a change in the ownership signature. It wasn't flashy, just a metadata drift, a shift in the registration fingerprint tied to the production keys. But that's all it needed. The kill switch clause in the license didn't care about intent. It cared about change. And the moment that internal transfer filed through Gridware's system, trigger condition met, license invalidated. The API, a distributed lattice of self-healing calls and modular endpoints, went into passive shutdown. Not an explosion, just a soft sigh. Jobs froze, retry queues clogged. Uptime dipped from 4 nines to a number so low it might have qualified for government assistance. For 17 minutes, the infrastructure stopped trusting its own heartbeat. Then it locked the doors. Gridware Core, the shiny prize Brennan had been waving at investors like it was his ticket to legacy, now sat cold and unresponsive. Load balancers screamed. CI/CD pipelines failed their own tests. The fallback logic rerouted traffic to older systems that hadn't been touched in a year. Brennan barked at ops, demanding restarts, patches, cache clears. Nothing worked. That's when my phone buzzed. One notification, no frills, Monroe Systems. API licensing revoked. Reason, unauthorized ownership transfer. System frozen. I was on my porch when it came through, still in my hoodie, sipping stale coffee, watching the last bit of sunlight dissolve behind a power line. When I saw the message, I didn't smile, didn't celebrate, just nodded once, quiet and final. They pulled the trigger. I just built the gun. Back at the office, Brennan had no idea what he'd done. He kept promising investors we were ironclad, even as Slack filled with panic. Just a temp issue, he told the CEO. Ops has it. We're golden. But the truth was already encoded into the API's response. 403 license revoked. No override, no rollback, no fix. Because the second he tried to own me, he lost the one thing Gridware couldn't survive without. And I wasn't going to lift a finger to bring it back. The conference room smelled like glass cleaner and cooked lies. Everyone was overdressed and overconfident, the kind of boardroom energy that comes from too many zeros and not enough reality checks. The CEO sat at the head of the table, teeth white enough to glow in the dark, tapping his fingers in a rhythm that only someone expecting a payday would have. Brennan was seated to his right, chest puffed like he'd just dropped a patent and a TED Talk in the same afternoon. Across the table, the acquisition team looked unimpressed, calm, unreadable. Their lead counsel, a woman named Grayson, opened a thick folder and started distributing printed packets without saying a word. Just page after page, sliding them out like she was dealing cards in a game no one else knew the rules to. I sat quietly in the corner. No nameplate, no introduction. Just engineering support on the invite. No one noticed me. They never do until it's too late. The CEO cleared his throat, smiling like a man already spending his phantom millions. So, as outlined in our prior discussion, Gridware Core forms the backbone of our infrastructure modernization. It's been built entirely in-house over the past 8 months, and Grayson held up a finger. Not rude, just enough to freeze him mid-sentence. She turned the next page. One sheet, single screenshot, black text, white background. License status invalidated. Reason, IP claim violation. Clause 9, unauthorized ownership transfer. Beneath that, a timestamp from 2 days ago, the exact moment Brennan filed the transfer. The silence that followed hit harder than a data breach. The CEO leaned forward slowly, squinting at the page like he was seeing English for the first time. He looked from the printout to Brennan, then back again, then said, voice level, "What is this?" Brennan's smirk faltered, just a hair. It's probably a relic file, some pre-integration artifact, not reflective of current license standing. Grayson didn't blink. This screenshot is from the live API license server, fetched at 9:12 a.m. today. It reflects the production instance currently linked to your main client deployment. Another packet was slid across the table. This one showed infrastructure status, red indicators, service degradation graphs, automated error logs filled with phrases like unauthorized access and contractual lockout triggered. The CEO's smile evaporated. He turned his full body toward Brennan. Not a glance, a pivot. Explain. Now. Brennan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a man trying to remember what bluffing felt like. I saw his jaw clench, then unclench. He shuffled his own packet like the answer might be hiding between the pages. Finally, he offered a nervous chuckle. We've had some ops issues. We're working through them. Legal's aligned, everything's... Grayson cut in. Your legal team submitted a document claiming full IP ownership. That act voided the original licensing terms tied to Monroe Systems, LLC. As a result, we cannot verify functional access to the core infrastructure you've marketed as proprietary. The CEO was pale now, hands steepled under his nose. I thought this was built internally. Brennan, scrambling, gestured at me. She built it. Sarah, it's internal. She works here. No, I said, flat and cold, my voice the only thing in the room that didn't tremble. I licensed it, through my LLC, which you just tried to absorb without consent. The air snapped. No shouting, no slamming hands, just that dead stillness that follows a seismic shift. Grayson leaned back. Unless you can prove clean ownership, and unless the API is restored with full functionality, we're halting proceedings. And just like that, the $145 million valuation turned into a pile of paper and the echo of Brennan's last bad decision, because the core tech wasn't theirs. And now, it wasn't anyone's. Brennan started flailing. You could see it happen in real time, his whole facade cracking like wet drywall. First came the stammering, then the frantic page flipping, then the darting eyes, like maybe if he stared hard enough at the printouts, they'd rewrite themselves out of sheer fear. Legal was already 2 steps behind, whispering to each other like a backline of malfunctioning code. Nobody wanted to touch the fire, but everyone could feel the heat. The CEO didn't say a word. He just stared at Brennan like he was trying to mentally rewind the last 4 months of his life and find the exact moment he made the mistake of trusting him. And Brennan, idiot that he is, kept digging. Okay, so maybe the transfer wasn't finalized, he blurted out, sweat blooming at his collar. But that doesn't mean the license is dead. We can fix it. We'll negotiate with her. There's a path forward. We can resolve this amicably. I stayed quiet. Let it all hang there, the desperation in his voice like a siren song for corporate collapse. Then I reached down, slow and calm, and pulled the folder from my bag. Thick, unassuming. No flashy cover or glossy branding, just truth on paper. I slid it across the table to the buyer's counsel, then looked straight at Brennan as I said the only thing I had been waiting to say. It was never yours to claim. Inside the folder, the original Monroe Systems LLC Incorporation documents, state filed 3 years prior to my Gridware employment. Time-stamped server logs showing the first commit of the API months before I ever signed their offer letter. The full license tree, clean, self-contained, mirrored across multiple off-site repositories, all signed digitally and notarized physically. Every page a nail in the coffin. Grayson didn't even finish reading before she stood. We're withdrawing, she said, turning toward the CEO, until your IP is clean, if ever. There was no room for negotiation in her tone, just finality, and the kind of precision that only comes from someone who's already moved on to the next deal in their head. The CEO opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, closed it, then opened it again, but nothing came out. His eyes drifted from Grayson to me, then finally landed on Brennan. You're done, he said, voice like ice cracking over water. Get out of the room. Brennan froze. What? Wait. No, this isn't on me. She tricked us. She manipulated the system. You manipulated the system, I said, standing now, folder still warm from the table. I protected mine. Legal didn't defend him. Neither did Ops, or the board observer on the Zoom call who suddenly went dark. Brennan was alone, and for the first time since he swaggered through our doors with his agile bumper stickers and his synergy word clouds. He looked small. He He gathered his notes, trembling hands trying to maintain some scrap of dignity, but the illusion had already died. The door closed behind him with the softest click, like a breath being exhaled after holding it too long. No one spoke. Grayson collected the folder, gave me a nod of professional acknowledgement, and left. I didn't stay to watch the CEO spiral. I didn't need to, because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just slides across the table in a manila folder and walks out without saying a word. The cafe was nothing special, just a corner spot with mismatched chairs and a barista who knew how to make coffee without asking for my name or life story. I liked that. I liked the silence, the absence of posturing, no one trying to steal anything but Wi-Fi. My laptop was open, but I wasn't working. Not really. Just watching. The news broke like a dropped wine glass. Shards of ego, money, and denial scattered across every tech feed. Gridware acquisition collapses amid licensing scandal. Core infrastructure found legally compromised. Investors withdraw. Monroe Systems announces strategic partnership with rival infrastructure firm. All in a row, like tombstones. We'd signed the deal the day before, my LLC and a lean, hungry competitor who had something Gridware never did, respect for ownership. They didn't care about slide decks or titles or who wore the flashiest Patagonia vest. They read the damn contracts. They paid attention to who built what. And when I showed them the system, the real system, they didn't ask to own it. They asked to partner. We kept it clean this time, cleaner than before. Faster, too. I rebuilt the core from scratch. Modular, elegant, version-controlled like a razor. This one wouldn't get tangled in corporate hands. I wrote the license terms myself, tighter than a drum. Across town, Gridware was still trying to spin. They pushed a statement claiming continued innovation and client confidence. Meanwhile, they were gutting teams, slashing burn rate, begging their Series C to stay afloat. Their core product, the one Brennan rebranded with my name and stripped of its soul, was gone. And the funny thing about hollow shells, they echo when they fall. I sipped my coffee. No headlines screamed my name, no think pieces on Medium, just me, a cafe, and a quiet message from a friend still inside. They're calling it a salvage operation now. CFO walked out this morning. Good. I refreshed the feed. Another alert pinged. Their valuation had cratered by 60% in 3 weeks. Clients were fleeing. CTO position, vacant. No one came to me for rescue. Because they knew. They all knew now. I closed the laptop, let the moment sit, let it breathe. Because after years of being the quiet one, the ignored one, the dependable ghost in the machine, I had finally spoken. Not with a mic, not with a scene, with a clause, with a signature, with silence that cut deeper than any public call-out ever could. And as the sunlight shifted across the tabletop, I thought about all the times I stayed late fixing their mistakes, all the times they called me resourceful when they meant expendable. And I thought about Brennan, his smirk, his certainty. I didn't need revenge, I just needed truth to be louder than the lie, and it was. They wanted my work. Turns out, they should have asked the guy who built it before the guy who stole it.